Ciao, Michela. Thank you so much for joining us today on the Vineyard Underground podcast.
Hi, Fritz. Thanks for having me. It's my pleasure to be here and share some news about the lanternfly.
Yeah, well, you are the viticulturist at Penn State. You've been there for a while, and as you know, Penn State's my alma mater. I did both my undergrad and grad degree there. And when they hired you, that was a good thing that they did, Michela. And we need more good Italians here in the East Coast to show us Americans what's going on in the vineyard. And but I'm sure you learned so much since you've been in that position. How's it been so far? What year did you start? Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yes, so I started here at Penn State in 2014. So it's been 9 years already. Yeah, and definitely I learned a lot about growing grapes in the Eastern United States. And we do a lot of work with grape growers. So it's been, a great collaboration. Before that, I was at Cornell for a postdoc for about 4 years. And before that, as you can hear from my accent, I studied and grew up and studied in Italy. So I did my undergrad and PhD in Italy at the University of Bologna.
Nice.
Yes.
All right. Well, I've definitely been through that city. It's beautiful. I need to ask you where to eat at a restaurant next time I go, if they're still there, the ones you went to. But how about spotted lanternfly? How did you get involved? Obviously, we know that it's an invasive species that impacts vineyards, and you are a viticulture researcher at Penn State. So
yeah.
You are part of a team. Is that how this is working?
Yes, definitely. So as you said, I work, I'm a viticulturist. So I work on grapes, but I do production and ecophysiology. So I'm not an entomologist, right? But since the lanternfly is infesting vineyards, unfortunately for us and for grape growers, I've been actively involved and leading research on spotted lanternfly in vineyards. And I work with a team of entomologists, even plant pathologists and food scientists, like wine chemist experts on better understand the effect of lanternfly and how to manage lanternfly in vineyards.
Pennsylvania is just such a diversely planted region with American and then French American hybrids and then vinifera. So it's a great place to study it. Unfortunately, you've been pushed into that position, but you can inform so many other states because of that. I'd like to talk a little bit about identification. I know we'll put some links in the show notes about how to identify lanternfly. Can we talk just a little bit about the life cycle? When would a grower, let's just say in the eastern states where the issue is bigger, where would a grower look? What would they look for? And when would they look for it?
Yes. So first, I would say the lanternfly is very easy to identify in every stage, from like egg masses to nymphs to adults. So that is a good part. It's easy to identify and they're easy to see, especially the adults because they're big. Yes, I mean, they have one life cycle here in the Eastern United States in our climate. So they have one life cycle per year. And typically, so what growers do, they scout the area around the vineyard or their vineyard for egg masses, just to have an idea, of how many egg masses the lanternfly lay in the previous fall. So the lanternfly will, overwinter as egg masses. Then, they have an understanding of the nymph population, because basically these egg masses will start to hatch in our climate, depending on the weather, typically like right now, maybe a little earlier in the southern part of the state. So like mid-May, beginning of May, they start to hatch. And then you will have nymphs. There are 4 different stages of nymphs, instars, 4 different instars, and that can be until bloom or fruit set. So will be for us, beginning of July. So that's when you have nymphs in your vineyard. And then you have adults, and unfortunately the adults will be in the vineyard throughout the fruit ripening and during harvest. And they stay there until basically the fall frost. So, they are, when we see the highest population overall of lanternfly vineyards is in mid-August, end of August until October, November.
Another question that I had is, and some growers have asked me this as well, Michela, is, if you're near a state where they've found spotted lanternfly and you have a vineyard, are there certain, things that would make your vineyard more at risk? I know you mentioned there's host plants like tree of heaven. So maybe you want to remove some of those host plants from around your vineyard, for example, to not attract it. Of course, they're attracted to the grapes. So you don't want to remove your grapes if you're a grape grower. But are there other things that we know yet? Like, are some grape varieties more susceptible, certain elevations, proximities to water? I'm just naming some things that I know certain insect pests, tend to gravitate towards. What do we know about those factors and the risk assessment of the growers' varieties and area?
Yes, those are all good points. So first, you mentioned about removing the tree of heaven, and that is something that growers have been doing if it's in their property, right? Because sometimes they live close to a neighbor and the neighbor maybe doesn't want to remove the tree of heaven if it's in the neighbor property. So there's been also some issues about, what to do and in that situation. And also, there is no 100% agreement on removing it, if removing the tree of heaven is the best solution. I think depends on how many you have. Some people prefer to keep a couple of them and to inject insecticide and use them as a trap tree. So the lanternfly will go there first and they will feed on the tree of heaven and they will die because the systemic insecticide is in the tree. That is an option. So there are, several options that can be concerning the tree of heaven management. Depending on how many you have, if they're in your property or close to the vineyards. Definitely, what we see here in PA, most of our vineyards are nearby, maybe some wooded area or other crops, right? We don't have 100 acres of vineyards, just vineyards, right? We have a kind of a diverse landscaping. So that I don't think it helps in terms of infestation because, again, the lanternfly can feed on many different plants and they like that. So they feed, on maybe tree of heaven first and then they move to the vineyard. So we don't know what will happen when they move to an area where there are only vineyards, right? For miles and miles and miles, because they don't really like a single plant diet. They want, different kind of plant hosts.
I wanted to talk a little bit more about treatment because, I don't know that there's any preventative treatments per se. A grower could spray. They can, like you said, maybe take out some of the host species around their vineyard, things like that. So I know that you have a nice chart at Penn State that shows the efficacy of different spray products. Some are organic, some are conventional. And if they work on the eggs, the nymph, or the adult. And I think that's important for growers to know because they need to treat what it is that they're seeing in the vineyard. So why don't we start really quick with kind of dormant? Are there treatments growers do on the eggs as a dormant spray? And then is there a different recommendation for the nymphs? And is there a different one for the adults? And we're going to keep in mind that the entomologist from Penn State is not with us on this call today, but I know that you've been helping growers with this. So what's just the general overview of control with the timing? Let's just go with.
Yes. So starting with egg masses. So at the beginning, the first few years, we saw lanternfly or egg masses in the vineyard, and they can be on the cordon of the vines, typically on the underneath the cordon. So, they like to, or on the posts of the vineyards. Growers were going there, and scrapping them, like removing them one by one, but that was like too much. It's not like feasible. It's very, very labor intensive. So they gave up on that. So there are some stylet oil that can be applied, but the success rate, I would say, is so and so. I mean, they can maybe kill 50% of the eggs or the nymphs. So it's not very. So basically, what growers now do, most of them, they wait for the egg masses to hatch. So they're going to treat the nymphs. So they don't typically do anything about the egg masses. For the nymphs, they're relatively easy to control, but definitely chemical control is the only option right now.
Right.
So that is a problem, again, because of many consequences of increased insecticide use in vineyards.
Right. And pre-harvest intervals. I mean, the products, some you can't use within 2 weeks of harvest, some you could use within 1 week, some you could use within days of harvest. So the grower needs to be aware of what their options are for the harvest too.
Yeah. In fact, the nymphs, are easier because they're early in the season, right? So they can, and typically if growers prefer other insects like Japanese beetles, here in PA, or grape berry moth, they can basically, also kill the nymphs of the lanternfly. So they spray one insecticide and, and they get rid of the lanternfly as well, in addition to the other insects, pests. But for the adults, like you were saying, is a very, very different story, because they are a harvest, close to harvest. So in addition to problem about what type of insecticide to use, there are problems like, also they need to harvest at the same time. So it's a logistic issues. And the major problem we see is that lanternfly can be easy to kill, the adults, right? So you spray, you kill them, after maybe a few days, you can see, most growers see a new population infesting the vineyards.